Welcome everyone to the Soul Foundation's live AMA. So it's great to have so many of you joining us from all over the world. My name is Maura Mindrilla and I am the Director of Strategy here at the Soul Foundation. Before I introduce our speakers, let's start with some context. The idea behind today's event is to bring you into the kind of in-depth fireside discussions that we have at our symposia. Since not everyone can attend in person, we are expanding these conversations through an online format, making them more accessible and interactive for you. This isn't just about sharing insights, it is also about hearing from you. The reason for our symposia, one reason for our symposia to be so successful is the incredible depth of knowledge in our audience. So your perspectives really help us to shape our work. And this new format allows us for a more direct engagement with you. So at a time when discussions on UAP disclosure and policy are more important than ever, we remain committed to our rigorous evidence-based approach. And our goal is to provide a space for informed discussion and critical thinking, especially as new developments unfold. So today's AMA, titled Breaking New Ground in UAP Science and Philosophy, features our founders, Dr. Garry Nolan and Dr. Peter Skafish. Let's get to know them. Dr. Garry Nolan doesn't really need an introduction, but for those who would not know, he is a distinguished professor in the Department of Pathology at Stanford University, who made significant contributions to immunology research, developing innovative technologies while founding multiple successful biotech companies. He was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award by Stanford University, recognizing his extensive work that includes over 350 research articles, 50 US patents, and pioneering efforts in single-cell analysis, cancer research, and infectious disease studies. Welcome, Garry. Dr. Peter Skafish is a distinguished anthropologist, scientist, and philosopher who has established an impressive academic career through his appointments as faculty member and researcher at prestigious institutions, including UC Berkeley, the Collège de France, and McGill University. His interdisciplinary work spans multiple intellectual domains, combining anthropological research with philosophical inquiry to develop innovative perspectives that really have influenced scholarship across several fields and research communities worldwide. He's currently very focused on policy work. Together, they will address key scientific and philosophical challenges from material analysis and consciousness studies to the broader implications of disclosure. So about the event today, this is a participatory event, and we thank those who have already submitted their questions. For those who haven't, I encourage you to submit your questions in our live chat as we go along. And thoughtful engagement from an informed audience has always been a defining strength for our work. Therefore, we look forward to an insightful discussion today. Last but not least, today we have some special announcements for you. So I am pleased to introduce something that we call the Soul Forum. It is our new membership-based initiative designed to facilitate deeper dialogue, provide early research insights, and foster direct interaction between you and experts. So before we dive into our questions, I want to hand it over to Peter, who is currently our managing director, to introduce you to this exciting new initiative that we're working on, the Soul Forum. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mara, and hi, everyone. Yeah, we want to announce today something we're very excited about, which is the Soul Forum. And briefly, because Mara has given us a rich introduction already, the forum is a way that will extend our symposium into a virtual format on a regular basis. As Mara mentioned, one of the reasons it's been a success is not just because we have great people coming on stage and giving talks and engaging in firesides, but we've assembled a really strong, very knowledgeable, very insightful community. And we know that if it meets only once a year, it's not going to be as productive for the UAP conversation and for disclosure as would happen if we can do this on a regular basis. So the Soul Forum is really two things in one. It's a virtual platform, and one part is something like a show, in which we will have talks, we'll have firesides, we'll have panels, and we'll have question and answers sessions with all of you. But at the same time, it's a conversation with our audience and our constituency. And what you'll see is that we'll have online virtual breakout sessions, which will take place after the show, with some of us joining to facilitate conversation. And that will allow us to really have the conversation that we've had in the symposium on a regular basis and be engaged with all of you, and to really drive forward the conversation in a way we were able to do with the live event. Now, briefly, before we jump in, there are a few other reasons we want to do this at this time. One is that we feel that, with the political turbulence in DC and even chaos there, that we can't expect any kind of rapid progress with government disclosure. And so that may mean in the next year or two that scientific research, an academic perspective, and the civil society conversation we've had will be more important than ever, and actually a way to move forward the conversation without having to wait on government at this time. Of course, we're going to continue to facilitate what happens in government, but we think right now science and research may actually get us further. And at any rate, right now, this is a time we need more of that, because we've moved into an environment where we have a rich alternative media space concerning UAP, but what's often lacking is a really strong ethos which says that we need to have minimal misinformation and maximum expertise and insight based on research and data. So by convening the forum on a regular basis, we will be able to present research findings, data, intellectual perspectives, and really a responsible take on the issue on a regular basis. And that's why we're doing it in a show format. But what will be different from a podcast is that we're going to be doing it live. So the conversations will be live, the firesides will be live, and there will be some pre-recorded segments, but it'll be like this, but much more produced on a regular basis. So it will launch in 2 weeks on Friday, March 21st, around noon Pacific time. And we'll provide more information about that soon. For now, to know, just look at our website, look at the membership page, and we'll say more at the end of this AMA about the schedule. So I think, Mara, back to you, and we can get started.
Thank you, Peter. Absolutely. So the Soul Forum, to summarize, is more than just a platform. It is first and foremost a community. And we are creating this dedicated space for serious inquiry and informed discussion for you. And whether you are an academic, a researcher, or simply passionate about these topics, this is your opportunity to contribute. So as Peter said, he already gave you some context about the forum. Let me give you some context about why we introduced the memberships, because we feel the world is finally paying more attention to UAP. However, understanding these phenomena remains one of the greatest challenges of our time. Government, academia, and the media are taking notice, yet much work remains. So the Soul Forum allows you to engage directly with experts, researchers, and professionals shaping the future of UAP science and policy. As a nonprofit, the Soul Foundation treats these membership fees as donations. So in return for your support, you become a Soul Foundation member and gain access not only to the Soul Forum, but also to a high caliber, focused community where meaningful dialogue can thrive. And on top of that, we will have a lot of perks for you. which I will discuss at the end of the event, as Peter has stated. Now, without further ado, let's begin the conversation that you have all been waiting for, our live Q&A with Dr. Garry Nolan and Dr. Peter Skafish. I am reviewing all your questions right now, and I want to thank again everyone who has submitted their questions in advance. Feel free to continue adding your questions in the chat as we go. And a massive thank you to Amanda Odo from the Anonymous Coalition for gathering your insightful questions from Reddit. So thank you, Amanda. Garry and Peter, before we begin, I want to note that we have a very large number of questions today. So in order to cover as much ground as possible, I'd appreciate it if you could keep your answers as concise as possible. Now, let's jump into the first question. That's on my note here, question number 5. Which is directed first to Garry, but actually also to Peter. So Peter, after Garry answers, you are free to comment as well. And the question is, stigma remains a significant barrier to public engagement with the UAP and NHI topic. There are even some concepts within the topic that receive excessive ridicule or dismissed outright and given no consideration. How might a multidisciplinary approach incorporating perspectives from both science and the humanities address this problem? Thank you, Oshasha2, for your question. Garry, go ahead.
Great. So actually, it's something that I've been thinking a lot about in how is it that we address the surprise or the raised eyebrows at the least, call it stigma if you want, of even my own colleagues. And so my first answer is, given the breadth of what the phenomenon seems to represent, rather than trying to answer a question so that your answer is swatted away or met with ridicule, the way that it best works in science is that you don't lecture a person about what you think the answer is. You draw out the student, and I consider skeptics students. You draw out the student by asking them questions such as, well, how would you explain X, Y, and Z, right? What would be your answer about what kind of civilization must be behind the scenes or civilizations behind the scenes that would address what it is that we think we're seeing? Because I can give you 10 answers, and you could probably come up with 10 very simple ways that you might explain it, but might explain is not the same as explain. So the best thing to do is in a conversation in science is to say, okay, well, how would you explain what that light is, or how would you explain why so many people see the same thing over time? Or, as I said before, what kind of civilization sits behind, and with what kind of capabilities must it have to do what it is? Now, it doesn't mean that you're saying it exists. I'm just asking you to fantasize. I'm asking you to use your own creativity, because if you can get people to walk through those steps, what happens is you're starting to burn a pathway in their neurons that allows them to accept an answer that you might give them. So that's really how I would begin to do it. And that's how I do it with my colleagues. I said, okay, well, what do you think it might be? How is it that you think that this is explainable? Other than just dismissing. Imagine that it is true. Don't dismiss immediately. Imagine that it's true and take your mind through the steps to achieve what the answer might be. Because if you can't get them to even think it, then how do you get them? I mean, the best answer would be like, can you imagine a civilization even getting to Earth? If you can't imagine a civilization capable of sending something to Earth, answering the question that are they here is meaningless, because you already thought that they can't even get here. And that's something that, for instance, Neil deGrasse Tyson often does. Well, they can't get here. Well, of course they can. We can get there. It might take us 5 million years, but we can get there. So that's the beginning of my answer. It's obviously long conversation. Peter.
Peter, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think I can offer a pretty complimentary answer on this point. The humanities. Let's say what the humanities are first. In French, the way you would describe them is you call them the sciences humaines, the human sciences. And of course, that doesn't mean science in the sense of hard science or the natural sciences. It means a method-based or methodological knowledge of humanity, of human institutions, of culture, of society, of history. And the humanities have to be responsive to social events, historical events, politics, and so on. I mean, we can't separate those things from the way we know things. And so what I often do with colleagues and in friendly debates with colleagues, and the debates have become increasingly friendly because of this, is I point to the US government conversation. Because if Barack Obama has provided an endorsement of the topic, if H.R. McMaster, John Podesta, John Ratcliffe, another director of national intelligence, key senators, and so on, have been discussing UAP, that likely means, given that these people have the most access to classified information often in the US government, that there's something to this, and they're not confused about what they're talking about. They're not talking about Chinese or Russian government secret projects. Now, I think for this audience, that seems like a obvious answer. But it's not, because often what we want from the government is we want immediate disclosure, we want a release of classified information, and we're often forgetting that what's important about government knowledge is that it's an endorsement of the reality of this stuff that science has not been able to provide because it wasn't interested in doing that yet. And so I think if we start with government and we take the perspective on knowledge, to sum this up, that the humanities have, which is that knowledge is not unconcerned with or separate from human institutions and human action, then we have an excellent starting point. And I think that's something to remember in the next years, because I think that, I mean, no one can deny, whatever your political perspective is, that we have a lot of turbulence in government right now. And so rather than wait for the government to disclose, we can do a lot with what's happened already to move the conversation forward.
Fantastic. I think this, thank you both for bringing this interesting perspective. It is certainly a conversation that can go on and on. But today it is about respecting as many people here present as we can. And so I'm moving on with the questions. So next question is question number 27 for me. Just letting the producers know. The question is from Brian Anslinger. I teach a class about UAPs at a community college in Portland, Oregon. Every single day, new people are discovering this topic and becoming curious about UAP, trying to learn about more about it, and yet there is not really a format agreed upon foundation for educational people about this topic. If you were building a fundamental course, let's call it UAP 101, what would absolutely be in the syllabus, and conversely, what might need to be left on the cutting room floor? So question for both of you. Garry, can you start answering?
Well, I suspect Peter would agree with this. I would start with the, sort of a Jacques Valléan approach, which is the context from the view of history. This is not something that has been seen before, and that many societies and cultures have viewed, even if you want to call it the paranormal, and I would like to reclaim that word in the most positive sense, that the history of the paranormal, in which UAP gets classified, whether we like it or not, is thousands of years old. And, we have on our shoulders the history of all of those contexts. And now it's up to us today to see if there's a thoroughfare through that explains as much of it as possible. So I would start with at least that, and then so that would be sort of like what's been happening over all of those thousands of years, and then more recently, what are the events that have brought it at least into the mind of Western civilization, right? But one of the things I would do is I would not start at Roswell. I would start at the very least with events that happened in the late 1800s and 1900s, as reported in newspapers, where otherwise, and this is funny, as how it's often put, an otherwise reputable individual by the name of X, Y, or Z saw this, and nobody thinks he's crazy, but we're just reporting it in the newspaper. So there weren't TVs then. There weren't, wasn't social media, so they didn't have any preview of what was coming 100 years from then, in terms of the kinds of things that people would see, and yet those events match exactly the sort of things that we are seeing today. So how do you explain that? So I think if you can give people that data to say, okay, well, look, this has been happening a while, and it's not just recent, and it's not mass hysteria. I think that begins to open the aperture in people's minds of like, okay, this is the beginning. It's expanded now. How do we explain what we're seeing? So that would be at least my beginning of a syllabus. Peter.
So to give a quick answer, because I know we want to be concise today, I'm going to show you a book that I think is fundamental, that should be very near the start. It's this book by J. Allen Hynek, the Hynek UFO Report, and then another book called The UFO Experience, which I think is the better of his two. But I think that without Hynek, if you're teaching on UAP and UFOs, you don't have your floor in data. And a lot of the best data was the Blue Book data. And this is the honest evaluation of the UAP data from Blue Book. And it's additionally where we get the typology of distant and close encounters, including close encounters of the third kind. You need to understand Hynek's work to understand that you really have strong observational data coming from the very start in the 1950s. But it's forgotten now because I think we tend to be more concerned with the most exotic aspects of the phenomena. And we're often forgetting that in the reporting, you're looking at very stable kinds of phenomena. You're looking at disks, you're looking at triangles, you're looking at spheres, and they tend to be reported as metallic and so on. So you want that. Now I'm going to add very quickly a couple other books without saying much about them that I think need to be on the table to understand the history of this, and they'll be surprising. I would encourage people to read a book called The Wizards of Langley. This is a history of the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. And we know the agency has had a lot to do with the history of UAP secrecy. But I think our conversation about that secrecy is missing something if we don't look at historical scholarship about the agency and the part of it that dealt with science and technology. This is a great book. It's considered to be excellent first-rate scholarship by historians, but also by people that work in the agency who often recommend it. And another book, and I think this will be very interesting to people in light of the UAP Disclosure Act, is this restricted data, which is a history of atomic energy and weapons secrecy. If you haven't looked at this book, this whole murky moment where the Atomic Energy Commission and the Manhattan Project seem to be involved with UFOs, but we don't have the historical record. That's not going to make a lot of sense. This is going to give you the grounding of what was really going on and what's known next to UFOs, and allow you to kind of work in and figure out how UFOs might have related to that. So those are some books I'd recommend. And I'd also say to look at Peter Sturrock's work, Richard Haynes' work, and again, Jacques' work, but don't neglect Jacques' books that aren't just about the supernatural or the so-called paranormal. Jacques did some really groundbreaking research on biological and physiological effects of UAP events in his book Confrontations. And that's a completely neglected book, I think precisely because it's concrete and empirical.
A treasure trove of books to dive into. Peter, if I would not have known better, I would have said you came prepared for this question. But he just had them lying around, so fantastic. The next question is for the production question number 7. It is asked by, I think, Tex Evice. Sorry if I'm butchering your screen name. And the question is one for Garry specifically. As for the materials recovered and its effect on biologic beings and its atomic structures. So the question is, as for the materials presented by Garry Nolan in one of the first videos of the Soul Foundation channel on YouTube, has any kind of similar material been manufactured in a graphene-like structure or one atom thick sheets way? And would that be plausible or an efficient way of testing the properties of such materials? And are these kinds of materials even worth testing under different conditions? Garry, what do you think?
Well, none of the materials that I have currently in my possession or that I've worked with have any effect on humans. I mean, first of all, they're not radioactive, so that would be the most easiest effect of something that's just, let's say, sitting on a table. If you had radioactive material, that could be dangerous. So none of the ones that I've ever worked on have that. You know, none of the materials that I've worked on, well, 2 actually, have structure. The first one that has structure is the material from Ubatuba, and its structure is simple. It's nearly pure silicon. I mean, silicon purity to the point that just is hard to make and not something that you would just drop on a beach in Brazil, Ubatuba, Brazil. So, I don't know what that means. It doesn't mean that it's from a UFO. It just means that it's strange and clearly manufactured. I have another material which is structured, and I have the atomic structure of that one as well at at about 3 angstrom resolution, if you know what that means, but near atomic grade covalent bond interaction. Again, it's a layered material that has let's just say 3 different metals. I won't go into the details of it, but the middle layer and the top 2 layers. The middle layer is only about a few nanometers thick. 1 nanometer is 10 angstroms. So, which means 10 atomic units or more, 10 covalent bond widths. So it's layered to the extent that something like a germanium diode would have been made, and yet it came from the 1950s. So that's odd. It doesn't have any strange atomic structure other than that. I mean, that's strange enough as it is, but it means it's manufactured again. So, you have to explain how it would get there in the middle of a desert and associated with a UAP sighting directly. So, now as to the graphene part of the question, I don't know. I mean, graphene could be considered something like a metamaterial, which has a recurring structure, as I was taught by Eric. I see he's in the chat. Metamaterial just doesn't mean any strange material. It means a recurring feature that can manipulate electromagnetic waves. So graphene is something like that. But I mean, yes, the answer is yes. It probably would have interesting things to do with it. But I don't know of any particular ones that can affect human physiology, other than just getting in the way of a microwave, for instance, which you wouldn't want to do.
I imagine. All right, then I actually really like the question from the chat that I just saw. So for the production, it is question number 35. So it's a live question asked by Camille Mackay. Question for Garry, and it's actually a pretty good follow-up question. It is said UFOs are conscious. Are we seeing biometallurgy, for example, neurons stitched into the materials or anything of that kind? Garry.
I mean, I haven't seen anything like that, but personally, I mean, yes, I've heard claims around the fact that they might be conscious. You know, I think science doesn't even understand how the human brain is conscious, right? There's a lot of argument as to whether it's purely material and the interneuronal electric charge that creates whatever we think of as consciousness. And everything all the way to the brain is simply a vessel in which some extra dimensional object, which is our consciousness or soul, resides, and it interfaces through. And I don't know what the answer to that is. And then there's the Hameroff-Penrose orchestrated reduction concept of that microtubules are the generator of consciousness. So, I mean, let's just say that there's something about putting materials together in just the right way in space-time, and we are just organized space-time, allows for consciousness to form. And that's what's going on right now in anybody who might be listening and understanding. But so I can imagine that you could do organized space-time with metals or plasma, and that would be sufficient to create a consciousness. So I don't think you have to be wetware to be conscious. I think that there probably are such things. So, but this gets back to almost the very first question. It's like people go, "What do you mean? Oh, come on, a rock or something that might look like a rock can't be conscious." Well, but if you organize it the right way and it mimics the structure of a human brain in some way with metals, why not? And so, I mean, the only question that remains is whether such organized structure can fit all of the three categories of what I just said. Could it do some sort of orchestrated reduction? Can it process information at a level that we think our brains can? And third, you know, if consciousness did reside elsewhere in some other extra dimensional plane and needs an avatar through which it operates, can, you know, organized metals do just what our wetware in our brain does? I don't know, but again, it's something you don't answer the question when anybody asks you it. You engage in a questioning format with the other person. Well, what do you think? How do you think that this could work? So that's my answer, short and sweet.
Thank you. Thank you, Garry. I like short and sweet. So again, gentle reminder for both of you to keep it all short and sweet. The next question is actually also consciousness related and is directed towards Peter. So for the production, it is question number 20, and it was asked by Flips and Giggles. Interesting name. Peter, if our cultural and scientific frameworks shape how we interpret reality, could some high strangeness experiences be a direct result of an observer effect on a deeper physics-based level? If reality is a construct of mind, what implications does that have for how we engage with anomalous events? And could belief and expectation be active variables in what we experience? A nice one. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great question. Now, I'll remind people I'm not a physicist or a natural scientist. So to be responsible, I'm not going to pretend I know how to answer that as a physicist interested in consciousness would. I'm going to point out first something that I think is forgotten, that we have really big, very stable cultural frameworks and cosmological frameworks that are shared by not just hundreds of millions, but I think in this case, maybe by at least 1 billion people. Buddhism, Hinduism, which would take as their point of departure for thinking about reality, the primacy of consciousness, or at least awareness. When you talk to people who are serious about a Buddhist practice, about UAP, they're very kind of nonplussed about the idea that this might have something to do with consciousness, because if they're being let's say, consistent about the doctrine or even the science of consciousness that they have, they regard most things that we would take to be material objects, or all things, as phenomena that are simply part of consciousness or part of awareness. And they don't draw a lot of ontological distinctions between things that would be more or less material. So that's a useful perspective to have in mind if we're trying to figure out whether observers might have some kind of effect on what they're seeing, both with UAP and other kinds of, let's say, paranormal or noetic and psychical phenomena. At the same time, I want to say briefly that my own perspective on UAP is different than a lot of people's today, in that I think we have a lot of data that shows that we're dealing with, in immediate descriptive terms, with tangible physical objects, with vehicles, and that those UAP are very different from orbs and other kinds of things we'd associate with religious experience or strange noetic phenomena. I don't think we're dealing with the same thing. And so I think in those cases, you'd want to be careful in thinking that the what you're calling an observer effect is what's primary, because I don't think those, I don't think UAPs in that sense are really shifting their form in relationship to us. That doesn't rule out that they may have some kind of effect on our perception and consciousness in order to camouflage themselves. We have a lot of reports of that from the intelligence community. But I think those may be much closer to objects as we understand them than a lot of the other things that we're interested in.
Thank you, Peter. And I will ask maybe a continuation of that question, but this one's for Garry. It has been asked by the same person. So for the production, it is question number 15. So Garry, if consciousness studies receive the same level of funding as particle physics, what would be the first experiment you'd prioritize? Would you focus on neural correlates, extend cognition, or something we haven't yet imagined? It's a good one because we do have a consciousness work group that we're launching here at Soul. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, I would start with the basics, which is, get the metadata on the individual, meaning brain MRIs, fMRIs if you can afford it, they're expensive, EEGs, etc. I would collect, vetted individuals with claimed abilities, and put them into test situations where they can be evaluated. I would, if they allow, collect their genetics, because the DNA is the architect of how your brain is formed. It's not the whole architect, but it's a good part of the story. And then I would just start collecting the data and see what comes of it. Now, that's pretty obvious, and in fact, there's been places that have been doing it for a long time. I mean, University of Virginia, I think, a couple of other institutes have groups that are doing this, and there are others that I won't name them because I don't have permission to do so now, that are doing this, and there's significant funding. It's private funding already put behind it, so it's great. And I'm an advisor to some of these individuals. I'm not central to what they're doing, but I'm an advisor to it. So we'll see, helping to design what the experiments would look like.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you, Garry. I think the next question is for you for the production. Let's take question number. Sorry, I forgot the number. 34. So the question is, I'm getting the strong feeling that there is a technological aspect to the fabric of our reality beyond our current understanding that also directly correlates to some UAP. Do you agree or disagree? So this might be a short one, maybe a question for both, but Garry, go ahead.
Technological aspect well, I mean, to the extent that anybody in the audience follows what particle physics are and the waveforms of the quarks and gluons and et cetera, and the forces where we know that there aren't really particles, but there are just these strange waves with properties that I was just reading a paper the other day that have, one of them has a feature that you just can't explain as spin. It's some unknowable and abstract concept of a feature that the particle embodies. And then you look at all of the zoo of particles that exist and the rules by which they interact with each other. And it's pretty easy to walk away with a conclusion, not the conclusion, that it was designed to be such that planets could form, materials could organize in a way that eventually leads to life. Now that's a very, what's called the anthropomorphic principle, that, where we are using our post facto view of that, the fact that we're here and explaining it, say that, well, we're here because the universe was designed to make us be here. It's a very, that's a human centric and narcissistic view of things, but it's one way to think about it. The universe is amazingly organized if you look at what particle physics really is and how stuff operates. And I can't help but walk away and think of it as just a computer program that we're running in. That doesn't mean it's virtual. It just means that it's a very organized place.
And I'd follow up on that one just very quickly and say that, we often forget as we kind of stretch out into weird territory around UAP that we often don't so much need data to justify our interest in those directions. If UAP exist and are real in the way that I think most of us know that they are, a lot of things that we reject as being extremely improbable increase in their probability. And we've had other things, AI, for instance, that have increased the probability from an argumentative or speculative perspective of hypotheses that seemed absolutely ridiculous 10 or 15 years ago in academia, such as the simulation hypothesis. Not my favorite idea, but you see people in tech take it seriously because as they extrapolate out from what AGI and its next iterations might look like, it becomes very plausible to them to imagine that, just as Garry was saying, all sorts of things we assumed to be natural and physical rather than products of artifice, in fact, are artifice, meaning that an art was used to generate them, to bring them into being, which means that there might be makers to reality that we had never anticipated from a normal scientific perspective.
Thank you so much. Also, thank you for all your nice comments in the chat. I wish I could answer them all and ask all your questions, but we have to move on. So the next question is question number 14 for the production. And it is asked by Sir Brothers. So from your perspective, what is the purpose of engaging us? From our perspective, we are continuously told things like the public deserves to know, or this is a matter of national security, or we know exactly where X is, and then the same people in the same breath say they can't talk about it. Yes, we know this phenomenon. Logically, if it were so important that we should be spending money on this, investing time into various podcasts, bothering our senators, etc., would there be more whistleblowers and less gatekeepers? What do you both think, Garry and Peter?
I mean, it's a valid point, but you're talking about people's lives. It's easy to say, well, you should just talk, when the consequence of just talking is either you lose your friends at the least because you made a vow, or you lose your livelihood, or you end up in jail. So it's valid but not valid. Put yourself in their position. So while I appreciate the question, it just doesn't work in the real world. Now, but the point is that that's the reason for whistleblower laws, and the biggest push in my book is not that we should push for necessarily disclosure from the government, but we should push to protect the people who come forward first, because without that, you won't get the second or the first.
Yeah, now there's a lot of truth to what Garry just said. You got to understand that people who have security clearances up to the level that they need to have them to be privy to anything related to UAP tend to have those because they're good secret keepers, and that's the ethos they hold is part of their vocation. They hold it through their lives, and it is part of their vocational culture. So you can't expect from the intelligence community or the military a lot of whistleblowers. Now, that said, I'll give a slightly different perspective on this, which is that you also don't need those people. Right now, I think we have a lot of information that's come out of government, enough to understand that, look, the United States government is engaged UAP is real things and objects for a long time. They apparently have a crash retrieval program, other secret efforts. That gives us enough to look at data that is completely public record and to do research, to do citizen science, to do investigation, and start to really think about some of the bigger questions about how these things work, who might have manufactured and designed them, and so on. We're not dependent on government to answer those questions. And people will tell you who have been adjacent to the government efforts that, in fact, the US government doesn't have a monopoly on the topic. I think they do reach out to academic researchers and scientists at times precisely because they don't have the answers. And how would they for something this complicated and this so far beyond human understanding?
Thank you, Peter. The next question is actually very related to that one. It talks about control disclosure. So it's question number 10, asked by Beta Particle Mail on Twitter. So concerning on Reddit, I'm sorry, a correction on Reddit. Concerning control disclosure, why should the same type of people who have kept this secret for decades and who have historically made repeatedly disastrous decisions in general on behalf of the American people, why should they be trusted to select what truths about the world citizens should know and what counts as national security? An excuse that's already overused, and in the controlled model, even if there's congressional or presidential oversight, the actual people deciding what the public gets to know are still the same elites in the military, intelligence community, business, and academia that have actively kept this a secret. So I think this is a topic that really lives with our audience. What would you both say to address these concerns?
Well, like Peter just said, the information's out there. It's already pretty well understood. I mean, look, there's been enough whistleblower types where the information of how to do this has leaked out. We know how to call them. Whether you believe in psionics or not, it seems to be part of the process. So we know how to call them. The question is not, can you video them? I mean, Skywatcher has already shown that you can video them. And there'll be more of that kind of stuff, I think, coming in the future. So Skywatcher is one group of several that I'm aware of that are doing it independently. So that's citizen science. I mean, I think the answer is you don't wait for the government to do it for you. You don't wait for daddy or mommy to tell you what's going on. You just do it yourself. Because as long as you're not going out there with guns or energy weapons trying to pull something down and get yourself in a bad situation, there's no reason people can't do it themselves and organize. So that I think is the threat in a way that one needs to use against the governmental authorities who think that they hold all the marbles at this point. They don't anymore, because the people who've been in the program, like Jake and others who've made that statement publicly, have basically made their knowledge and ability public. So do it.
And
thank you, Garry. Peter, sorry.
Yeah, the way I would add to that is, I'm going to give a somewhat maybe sobering answer to the question about disclosure. We should all be careful in asking for too much disclosure too quickly. I still am unconvinced that we're ready for it, because my own view, and it's shared by people in the intelligence community who know about the secrecy, the reasons for the secrecy to various degrees, is that we don't really know why the United States government and some other governments have kept this secret to the extent they have for so long. And I'm not saying that the custodians of the secret are, the ones who should remain the custodians, so to speak. The problem is we don't know who they are exactly. And we don't know why they've been so attached to secrecy unless we try to reduce it to economic gain. Sure, there's a national security and geopolitical imperative for the United States in keeping technology secret, but there may be reasons this was kept secret that we would understand if we knew what those were. Now, that said, Congress entering the game changed it completely. That's an unfolding process, but Congress didn't keep the secret. Congress wasn't let in on the secret, and that was a separation of powers problem. That was a problem with respect to the Constitution, and that's changed now. So it may ultimately be Congress that now makes a decision about how much secrecy and to what extent about this, and that makes a decision about disclosure that no president will be able to control. I think that's a positive thing where democracy is concerned, where human initiative to understand this is concerned. But we should also be very careful. There may be traumatic knowledge for all of us there, and we really don't know what the effects are. So, we could go on about that for an hour, but I would offer a word of caution about that. We want to be very careful, and we want to look at ourselves as a society and as societies and ask ourselves, are we ready for this if we're not ready to handle much smaller issues?
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you for these caveats, Peter. The next question is actually very linked by chance. It's like you are a mind reader, Garry, to what you have said right before. This is why I picked it. It was asked on Reddit by Illuminimal. I'd love to know how, if either of them, so you or Peter, if you have ideas for opportunities for citizen science to take place. There are a lot of people interested in the phenomenon and willing to do something to further knowledge, if only they knew what thing could be done. And now, of course, you will say to everyone that they need to become volunteers, that's all. But if not, please go ahead.
Well, I mean, certainly there's Sol, and Mara and Peter and others are leading an effort to begin to organize the volunteers. We need volunteers to organize the volunteers. But there's many more organizations out there. I mean, there's literally a cottage industry of organizations, everything from Ryan Grace's Americans for Safe Aerospace. There's Scientific Coalition for UAP Research. There's UAP DF, the Defense Fund, et cetera, et cetera. So they're out there. Go look at the organizations and see how you can sign up. Or if you think that there's something missing, create your own. That would be my advice.
Peter?
Well, to be concise, I'll second that. And I'll say quickly, yeah, there are a ton of opportunities. And I think what citizen scientists should do, who are not necessarily professionals or doing research full time, is begin to do your research with the proviso that try to focus on stuff that is very grounded. Because the problem with UAP is you've got so much junk data. Data is not something you get from a podcast. Data is not something you get from Reddit generally, unless it's experiencer narratives. You need to really start with data, quantitative or qualitative, but you want data. And if you're just gathering data from a camera or a telescope, that's actually much more significant than is understood. You need data, and you need tons of it.
Thank you, Peter. The next question is intriguing, actually. So I'm going to ask it anyway. It's for you, Garry. It's question number 22. It was also asked by Rambus Jarbus on Reddit. So Garry, without implicating yourself, the question states, colleagues or making decision makers look bad. Do you or other scientists fear this research or study will get the axe with the current administration?
No, in fact, I do not. In fact, I think this administration, and again, like Peter has said, despite your politics, has actually been way more open to the subject matter than anybody would have expected. I mean, we all know that representatives and senators, and more so, frankly, on the Republican side than on the Democratic side, have been open about the issue. So now, as Peter mentioned earlier, the turbulence of the politics might slow things down because people are busy, watching the stock market or 5 other things that are important. And so, I'm actually still quite hopeful. But again, because there are parallel efforts beyond the government, which are proceeding independent of the turbulence, I'm actually quite satisfied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know the question was directed to Garry, but do you have anything to add, Peter?
No, let's move for sake of time.
Of course. All right. Then the next one is for you, for the production. It is question number 6, asked on Reddit. The Reddit people are extremely active today. Thank you for that. So the question is asked by MeetXWhip. Dr. Skafish, if NHIs indeed utilize a consciousness-based technology, could it be that disclosure is not just a matter of politics and science, but also of the cognitive evolution of humanity? Is there a critical mass in collective awareness beyond which open interaction or full disclosure becomes inevitable?
Let me try to answer that as an intellectual and academic, which is to say that nobody can give you a yes or no answer to that responsibly. If I think it's more in the domain of prophecy or spirituality to say yes or no to that. And I'm not against those things at all, but I want to really speak as an intellectual right now. I want to address one thing first, which is that I do think that, I don't know about technology, but yes, there's a noetic dimension to UAP and to occupant encounters specifically, which is very strong, which means that we can't simply understand this from, you can understand it from a materialist perspective, but you can't grasp it if you think it's just reducible to a problem about, okay, there are vehicles flying around and somebody made them. There are many other layers of significance to this. Now, I do think it requires, I'm not going to say a more evolved consciousness, because that would be I think evolution is more appropriate for thinking about biology than it is about human thought and consciousness. But yeah, I do think that we need to have a more refined, a more attuned, more subtle kind of consciousness to understand this, to understand that it's real, to perceive it. And it seems to me, and I state this hypothetically in order to be responsible about this, but it seems to me that in encounters people have with UAP and the alleged occupants, that consciousness is so fundamental that until we do our best work to upgrade ourselves, so to speak, we're going to have a very difficult time having even very minimal kinds of understanding or communication of them, whatever they are. But all that said, I don't think you need miracles. I don't think you need wholesale transformation of humanity. I think you need simple things like meditating a little more, even reading a little more. Reading affects consciousness and cognition. And let's say a little more attention, because we live now in a culture which is inattentive and which attention is robbed from it and robbed from us constantly. So all those things have to do with consciousness.
Thank you, Peter and Garry, and Peter especially for providing guidance. I feel you've been doing that a lot in your answers today. So did you, of course, Garry, but Peter had the books, you know, nothing beats that. So this being said, you know, at Soul, we also try to provide guidance, and more than that, we really want to be a trustworthy source of information for the different parties involved with this topic. So the next question for the production, question number 16, pertains to that. So it was asked on Reddit again by Sir Brothers. What exactly do you expect the public to do with this information? Do we need to write to our senators? And I think it's a very good question. What would be your guidance on that, Peter and Garry? Go ahead.
Peter, you go first. Go.
Okay, thanks. I think that the most important thing to do for people who are aware of this is to turn their minds to it, to turn their attention to it, to ponder it, to contemplate it, to ask questions about it, to reflect upon it. I actually think that's more important than taking action. We can go back to what Lou Elizondo said in, around Christmas of 2017, that if there was something like disclosure, it would cause everyone to take a deep breath, a pause, and to really contemplate the significance of what they learned. And I think we're, rather than imagine that there's going to be a big act of disclosure, I always think that's going to be the end of a process in which someone will be forced to do that because everyone will understand that it's real, and then you need a official statement from a government or a government office. Rather than imagine that's what disclosure is, imagine that we're in the middle of a process. We're in the middle of a historical event. And when you're inside an event, you don't know when it began and you don't know when it's going to end. You could be at the threshold of it. You could be 10 years into it. Its end could be tomorrow. You really don't know. Because we're in a process, I think keeping ourselves attuned to this and really thinking it through, sharing our thoughts with others, that does a lot more for our capacity to absorb, metabolize it, and effectively have something like a soft landing when we have more public consensus about it.
Garry?
Remind me the question, because I was reading all the stuff on the side and I lost the train, real quick.
Yes, Peter, maybe you can do that because I'm also reading other questions.
Well, the question is simple. Is like, and it's a great question. What should people do?
The audience do exactly.
What are what do we as advocates expect people to do?
So this actually loops back to the beginning. That was going to be my answer. It loops back to the beginning about it's not convincing anymore the government. It's coming up with ways that you can speak to your friends and the so-called skeptics or your families of what are the kinds of questions that you can ask them to get them to think through the problem. I mean, look, it's been something that I've done my whole life being a scientist, and it took me that long to come up with, I need to get back to my colleagues with questions rather than just lecturing them. And that's fine. It took me that long. So it's not like I'm being pedantic and saying, oh, this is obviously what you should do. It's that you need to think through how you talk around the rhetoric that has been designed as a moat around this problem by a rhetoric very well designed by people who are experts at keeping secrets. And so using that against them and for your friends and saying, well, have you looked at the data? Here's the data, not the conclusion. Here's the data. What do you think about it? That's how you do it. And you have to just practice it. It doesn't come easy. It doesn't fall trippingly off your tongue.
Thank you both. It is a tricky question indeed. and we are all, exploring. So yeah, thank you for your guidance. The next question I would like to ask you both is question number 38 for the production, and comes from Antoine Juculier. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It was a live question in our chat. And the question is, do you think the disclosure process is solely in the hands of the US government? Isn't it also in the hands of other governments around the world? And are they willing to take part in this disclosure? It is a fair question, because in many parts of the world, for example, Japan, there's still an enormous taboo also in governments around the topic. So Peter, do you want to give us some insights on this?
Yeah, I want to say something which I think speaks to the historical moment. I mean, I would say that both Garry and I would be highly confident that the Soviet Union and now Russia did have UAP efforts, or Russia continues to, and so there is some classified knowledge there. I've certainly been told that that's the case with the People's Republic of China as well. We know the UK and France to some extent have had classified efforts as well. So there are other governments concerned with this. But I'm pointing out Russia and China on this point because we want to remember that the United States has been, the US is historically a very experimental society and country. And the second half of the 20th century is within the military and the intelligence community and Congress. It's an experiment with having a lot of power and a lot of secrets to go with that, and then balancing that with openness and transparency. And wherever we come up on how much openness versus how much secrecy there should be, and I'm somebody that is generally an advocate for openness, we have to acknowledge there has been an experiment in which all stakeholders believe there should be openness and transparency. And because of that, I would really strongly advocate for seeing the value and the worth in the US doing this, even at a time when the US is being, to put this very diplomatically, very rude to its allies, to the point of possibly alienating them. Even with that going on, we have more hope in this going well and in a way that would be oriented towards a democratic politics and ethos if it comes from the United States than if it's coming from other countries right now, which simply have no commitment to freedom of speech, the press, individual rights to the extent the US has. So that's one perspective on that. The other, though, is that this absolutely needs to be international. It needs to be transnational, meaning it shouldn't just be about states. It should be about civil society. And what we should be pushing for is, whatever information can be declassified by the United States, great, but it shouldn't just be done with the idea that it's to the benefit only of Americans. It should be to the benefit of all humanity. This is something that concerns everyone. It concerns humankind as a whole. And I think that's why you've seen, and it's certainly something we've cultivated at Soul, a strong alliance between right and left and center on this and across the cultural spectrum, because everyone recognizes that, whether they're on the left or whether they're on the right, they recognize that, okay, if this concerns us as a species, no matter our cultural and political diversity, whatever is done for this ultimately should concern human beings.
Beautifully said. Garry, do you have anything to add to that?
No, not really. I think Peter said it perfectly. So I think we could go on to the next question.
Fantastic. The next question is question 36. It's also one of our live chat questions. So thank you, Just Bowman, for asking. Is Soul going to focus specifically on the UAP side of the phenomenon, or are you all incorporating a multitude of different tangential aspects like psionics? Good question.
So yeah, I get that. I get asked that a lot, and in a way, sometimes in an accusatory fashion, saying, "Well, why aren't you doing blah blah, all those other stuff?" And I think the answer is, even for Soul, controlled disclosure. in that you can't just dump the junk drawer out on the table in front of a bunch of scientists who you're trying to convince something. You need to do it in a controlled manner, and you need to say, okay, well, if you're talking about science, here's the controlled aspects of what it is that we can do, which is why I focus on materials. And to the extent psionics involves the brain, the brain structure, because those are things that I can work with materially and create data that I can share with other scientists. Now, the brain function, the avenue to psionics is through intuition. So the arguments that I usually start with other scientists is asking them, well, what do you think intuition is? Where does it come from? Is it accessing any kind of other information? And have you had any experiences? So for instance, I'll go to Harvard or Yale or wherever and give a talk on my immunology and at dinner, everybody wants to talk about UAP. They don't want to talk about my science. So they want to talk about UAP because they think it's cool. And actually the psionics in a way comes up through when the people say, oh, well, this is crazy. I said, well, have you ever been driving down the street and then you think of your spouse or a friend and then 5 seconds later they call? Why does that happen way more often than statistics would predict? And the usual answer is, oh, it's just you only remember because you think it's a synchronicity. But it usually starts them thinking. So that's the sort of that's how you start the conversation with it. But soul is not adverse to it. Soul is just we have to build our foundation first in material science or in Peter's area of the human sciences.
Indeed. Peter, we would love your perspective.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple answers. One has to do with my own research. And so what I'm about to say is a bit provocative, but it's also designed to really address the problem of, let's not call it psionic. I don't think that's actually a term of art, psi phenomena or psychical research. I think those are more the standard terms. I'm working on a paper right now that I'll present at Rice University at Archives of the Impossible, a plenary talk there, titled The Corporeal Hypothesis. And I try to address in this paper and in this talk the problem of why UAP come with apparent occupants that have bodies almost exactly like ours. Somebody who comes out of the life sciences like Garry finds it almost preposterous. It's so inexplicable because it's not really something that would be predicted even by confident astrobiology. And yet it's there. And so what kind of sense can you make of it? Now, the reason I'm working on that problem is not because I think you're just dealing with something that's biological, physical, that you just have tangible vehicles, but you have to reconcile that qualitative data with the qualitative data that says there's a very strong psychical and noetic dimension to encounters with these beings and encounters with UAP. And so the question is, for me, why, when you have something that so strongly has to do with the noetic, do you also have the corporeal turn up? And so I mentioned that not just to describe my own thinking, but because I think that's the problem Soul has in charting its course and its research and its public education. We are dealing with, as Jacques Vallée said so well, way back in the 1970s, with a phenomena which is at once physical and objective, and then not just highly subjective, but highly noetic as well. And that is such a deep problem, and really for me, such a philosophical paradox that it requires us to be, it's almost an all hands on deck approach is going to be needed in academia and research to tackle this. And that's why, we have Garry working along his track with material science, which is absolutely fascinating to a person like me, because you get from UAP extremely rich novel data, novel instruments there. It's why we have an AI track to analyze data in the broadest sense, correlate it, and figure out what the new questions are that could come from that. And it's why I'm working as an anthropologist and a theoretician on experiencer narratives, which is another one of our focuses, because right there, from people who have had strong experiences, you get that confounding, inexplicable combination of noetic and physical phenomena that seem to be wrapped together in one problem. It's also why we're launching soon a consciousness working group that will do some scientific, some experiments that combine science and social sciences to probe deeper into what the cognitive conditions are of those experiences, and what's really going on with them at a neurological level, but also at a social level. What are the conditions for these kinds of experiences? So at any rate, that's how Soul's trying to do this. But, again, keep in mind that when you're working on research problems for which there's no subdiscipline, there's no existing field, you've only got dozens of people working, you're charting such a kind of pioneer course that don't expect quick results, expect a lot of questions. But the questions are the exciting thing, and we want to convey that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I have an interesting question. It's also directed to you, Peter, but I would love to hear Garry's take on it as well. It is question number 13. It was also asked on Reddit by MeetXWhip. So, Dr. Skafish, if NHIs indeed utilize a consciousness-based technology, could it be that disclosure is not just a matter of politics and science, but also of the cognitive evolution of humanity? Is there a critical mass in collaborative awareness beyond which open interaction or full disclosure becomes inevitable? Historically, UAPs and HIs have often been perceived through spiritual and religious frameworks. Thus, our modern scientific paradigm, which largely reduces consciousness to neurobiological processes, unintentionally act as a barrier to deeper understanding. Could this be why humanity remains locked out of a greater reality?
Well, I think if that's our last question, I'll answer it and then pass the ball to Garry, who I'd like to hear Garry's answer to that and for him to have the last word on that. That's a big question, and there are a lot of things in there, so I don't know that I'll be able to do it justice. But look, I think the advantage we have in having science be our point of departure for this, whether it's the hard sciences or the so-called soft and human and social sciences, is that we do have a data problem here. The more I do research daily on this, the more I see this. If you're dealing with a lot of really bad data, and for me, data, I deal with narrative as data, I deal with historical events as data, I deal with an interview as data, but a lot of the data that's out there, it's not reliable. Just even for knowing what the patterns of interaction have been with UAP and so-called occupants, you can't trust a lot of the things that people think are data. So having a scientific and research-based perspective actually gives you an advantage because you're less hoodwinked by your own assumptions that X, Y, or Z is true just because you decided it in private 10 years ago while not doing research. So that's the advantage we get from science. We also get the advantage with science that, look, I mean, if UAP are real, imagine, I'm not a scientist in that sense, but imagine what a field day this is for scientists. I've seen it with Garry with his research where he's completely turned on and exhilarated intellectually just by the idea of being able to look at the, to a nano level at materials and discover things about chemistry, engineering that we didn't think were possible. We're going to see things like that with biology, physics, and so on, if this stuff is as real as we think it is. All that said, yes, we need a diversity of cosmological and cultural perspectives on this, not because we know what it is and that other cultures have necessarily understood it better. It's just that when we look at the data on how people have experienced it, and I mean contemporary 20th century data, not stuff that's 5 centuries old that you may not be able to rely on, but 20th century encounters and events, it's very clear that people who have a less modernized, by which I mean a less physicalist ontology, tend to experience this in different ways. The different way is it's less fearfully, it's with more lucidity, and it's with more richer perception that then gives us in turn better data. So that's my brief answer.
So my answer is more along the lines of how does some kind of communication occur into our brains in a non-mainstream manner. So how is it that the brain is a receiver in some sort of psi event or a transmitter in some kind of psi event might operate? And I think the simple answer is we just don't understand enough about the universe. And that, as Peter was saying, our physicalist understanding and our limitations of what we think is possible occlude us from imagining the impossible. And so, I have no problem, as I mentioned earlier about how our brains literally sit in the matrix of space-time. I have no problem imagining that there's not information passing to and fro, that we're just missing. I was reviewing a friend who's a physicist, his theories of the universe that have equations that would even, I think, cause Eric Davis here in the chat to raise his eyebrows at, of how you could have extra dimensional interactions through just basically, I say extra dimensional, just the math says that they exist, that allows for information transfer. Now, okay, that doesn't mean it's spiritual. It doesn't mean it's magic. It just means it's a form of technology that we haven't appreciated or come to understand yet. So, 1,000 or 1,000,000 years from now, I have no problem imagining that somebody, even with mainstream science, physically being able to find the places in your brain where it might transmit electronic or EM signatures to accomplish transmitted information. Doesn't need to be even magic science. It just means better science than we have today. So, it's you only create new things by imagining the impossible and saying, I want to make it. And, to Peter's other point about, understanding materials, because in my laboratory, we've developed instruments my whole life and algorithms to understand the data that comes from them. We've gone deeper and deeper, and I've come to the conclusion that I need the atomic structure of the things that I'm studying, even in mainstream biology, to be able to understand how they function. I need that reality check. So what did that do? That caused me to now create, and I'm building literally now, and I bought the pieces for it. It's going to cost me millions of dollars for making an atomic imager. And that will also, if I get this other part of it working, be able to tell me the bond structures of the local materials that I'm looking at. Those two things together will allow me to say, here is reality. 99.999% of what we're interested in is material. So, right now we have pretty good guessworks of them. Well, let's just create a new technology that does it. Nobody else is doing it. So, I've convinced some people to, give me the money to do it. I'm doing it. That's what you do. You don't wait for somebody else.
Thank you. Thank you both, Dr. Garry Nolan and Dr. Peter Skafish, for sharing these insights beyond expectations and for pushing the boundaries of UAP science and philosophy today. These conversations are really crucial as we navigate this very complex and important topics of our time. And I personally love the diversity of your questions. I'm every time again and again amazed at how insightful our community is and engaged with this topic. You're very passionate, and it's wonderful to see. So if you want to stay engaged with us here at the Soul Foundation and continue exploring these ideas alongside key partners, key players in the field, we invite you to join our Soul Forum through our membership program. And as promised at the beginning of our event, this is the moment where I get to tell you more about our exciting news of the day, the launch of our membership. So the Soul Foundation membership program is now officially live on our website. It is your chance to join this thriving community of researchers, of thought leaders, and advocates pushing the boundaries of UAP science, policy, and philosophy. And by becoming a Soul member, you're not just gaining access to all these exclusive discussions, but also to research, to events, and you will be actively supporting our groundbreaking work in this field. So your membership is, as I said before, viewed as a donation, and that really helps us fuel our common mission. And to show our gratitude, we've packed the membership with incredible perks. So I'm just quoting a few, but you will see more on the website. So we have private forums and exclusive Q&As that are included in the membership. You'll get early access to research and to symposium invitations. You will get exclusive merchandise that we came up with and special discounts. And then for our top tier members, we will be launching more and more VIP events and opening up Soul behind the scenes with briefings, so people can play a more active role. And so we've designed 4 membership tiers. You can choose the level that works best for you. Note that all tiers, regardless of which one you go for, grant access to the Soul Forum. So just to give you a brief idea of the tiers, our tier 1 is really is called Core, and it's really the core of our membership. It is for those who want to support and engage in an active way in the Soul community and be involved in decision making and discussions. Tier 2 is called our Aurora tier. It is a deeper level of involvement with early event invitations included and some exclusive access to content. Tier 3 is our Helios, the sun itself, for those who are passionate about shaping the conversation with direct access to Soul researchers and so much more. And finally, our top tier is called Nova. It is the highest tier designed for those who want to actively drive real impact at the Soul Foundation, gain VIP access to private events, and directly have a say in Soul in a way. So if you've been looking for a way to get more involved, more informed, more connected, we hope this is it. And we hope you can join us in this adventure today. So the link to become a member should be in the description box below in the chat. And at the very end of the announcement, or maybe, oh no, you can see it now on the screen. You see our QR code that you can also use to scan and access the membership page directly. So what can I say? We are beyond grateful for this community. You make everything we do possible. And if you believe in this mission, whether it's, advancing AI for UAP, which is one of our projects, or whether it is studying experiencers, which is a second project we are launching, or exploring metamaterials, which is the Garry project he has just mentioned earlier, or shaping policy, you can get involved and you decide at which level. This being said, I'm passing the mic back to you, Peter, so you can tell us more about the Soul Forum. So remind us when the launch date is, maybe give us a sneak peek into who the first guests will be. Go ahead. Your mic is muted.
Thank you, Mara. And just to reiterate, because I'm some things I said at the beginning, because I'm a morning person and it was still morning in California. And I may have not said them as concisely or clearly as I'd hoped. The Soul Forum will launch on Friday, March 21st. We should be doing it around noon so that we can catch people in Europe after the dinner hour and in the late afternoon as work is winding down on the East Coast. The first episode will actually be a presentation of the work over the decades of a few members of the Invisible College. Hal Puthoff will join us. You all know who Hal is. And also Larry Lemke, a retired NASA engineer who is not well known, or a nuclear physicist, who's not always well known to the UAP community, but is a fascinating researcher and scientist actively working in the area. And Jacques Vallée has also agreed to join us. So I'll conduct a panel discussion with them. And the reason they've agreed to do it is because, like us, they feel right now that research and science are high priorities, and they want to share their accumulated wisdom and insight about this to encourage, a number of other younger generations to pick up the ball and roll with it. So that's the first episode, and you can expect and that's open. It doesn't require a membership. It will be after that we'll be doing member-only episodes, but that's to encourage people to engage us as members. And remember, those are tax deductible dues. They're gifts, so you can write them off your taxes. And this is simply to get access to the forum. It's not a transaction. After that, you're going to see a number of different episodes that will range from things coming from the natural sciences, including scientists who work on this but are not well known to the public yet, retired government officials again, but with a different angle. We've reached out to active government officials that you might be surprised would be willing to appear on the show. And we'll bring in civil society leaders, people from religious communities, theologians, and we'll also, of course, do the humanities and social sciences. Now, a last thing is we'll also have some different pre-recorded segments, one of which will be called the Soul Briefing, in which we give you maybe 5 to 7 minutes of curated information every 3 to 4 weeks that you can trust. It's vetted, it's verified. It is about current events, but also research findings. And Marek van Rennenkampf, who many of you know from his commentaries on News Nation, but also his editorials for The Hill, has agreed to do that. And he'll be turning up in the second episode and henceforth to do that. So that's a word about the Soul Forum. We're very excited about it. And again, it's a way to bring our symposium forward every 3 to 4 weeks in a virtual format.
Absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that, Peter. In short, the best way to get involved is to become a Soul member. So you can access all the Soul Forum interactions and so much more. I think the biggest perk is, to stay connected to Soul, to contribute, to really, play a big part in this. But you can also still volunteer with us, of course, or donate to the Soul Foundation. We are looking for passionate people to help with communications, marketing, and especially fundraising. You can, if you feel called, I would love to work with you. You can contact us by following the link in the description box below. And of course, you can always make a donation if you'd like to support us. You will again find the link in the chat. What else did I forget? I think this is the most important on how to get involved. Last but not least at all, I want to thank again, Dr. Garry Nolan and Dr. Peter Skafish for their extremely insightful guidance on these very difficult topics today. Also, thank you, Sarah B., for the thumbnail. Thank you to the Anonymous Coalition for their help with gathering questions from Reddit. Thank you, Jay Carson Weatherby, for all your great work and valuable help with the symposium videos. And a massive thank you to Ross Howard and Sam for their amazing work behind the scenes. They helped us produce this event, and they will also produce the Soul Forum, so look out for that. And this brings us to the end of today's discussion. So Thank you all for being part of this conversation. Thank you for all your questions, for your massive participation, and for being the amazing community that you are. Stay tuned for more events, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Peter, any last words?
No, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, Garry, for your participation today.
Thank you.